The NHS came in, GPs purchased their practice. They had therefore had a capital interest in the practice and hoped that when they retired they would be able to sell the practice to somebody else. So there was a financial reason too.
It's obviously quite a job sending out the BMA plebiscite to 56,000 doctors, asking them, roughly speaking, whether they approve of Mr. Bevan's scheme.
In the middle of January, the BMA launched a counter-attack to Bevan. They decided to put the views of all 35,000 members to the test in a vote, a plebiscite. If the doctors voted against the NHS, Bevan would have no workforce to power his health service. Simultaneously, leading opponents fired off a salvo of furious letters to the national press to whip up a frenzy and persuade every doctor in the land to vote no.
Our independence will have been sacrificed to a soulless machine governed by ex-miners, trade unionists, or even Marxists. It is essential we fight this proposal with all the resources at our disposal.
There were some quite vitriolic attacks upon the government as a whole and upon Honoran Bevan personally, where they said that the government were setting out to destroy medical practice in the country forever and for the future.
The State Medical Service is part of a socialist plot to convert Great Britain into a national socialist economy.
The notion of doctors being dragooned was very much the sort of notion that was being put to the profession by the BMA. You know, so that you do what you're told, you are no longer really in charge of what you do with your patients. The government gets between you and your patients.
The attacks became very personal. I think they believed that to make a point you had to be forceful to the extent of sometimes being offensive.
The bill can be written in 2 lines. I hereby take powers to do what I like. Signed, Nye Bevan, Führer.
The BMA's battle over the NHS looked like a class war, and Bevan was a lightning conductor for the fury of the profession, the press, and opposing politicians.
He was a fierce at times and really quite intense Welsh demagogue.
Oh, he was hated. To the people who opposed the NHS, he was seen as the Satan's architect who was driving it along. He was utterly reviled by some parts of the profession. He was a tough negotiator, and people really felt bruised after they dealt with Nye.
My husband was a member of the BMA. They used to have an annual conference, and I remember being with a group of wives, and one of them told me that she had got a solemn promise from her husband that in the event of Honoran Bevan becoming Prime Minister ever, they would emigrate. And this was serious. They couldn't stand him.
The BMA had even gone so far as to compare Bevan to Hitler, a comparison Bevan's arch-rival Churchill would have approved of, having previously equated socialism with dictatorship.
No socialist government could afford to allow free, sharp, or violently worded expressions of public discontent. They would have to fall back on some form of Gestapo.
And here was Churchill suggesting that the Labour Party would establish a society which would include Gestapo operations, etc. I think it's inconceivable that the BMA, being what they were, a very powerful, orthodox establishment, institution, it's inconceivable that they would not have recognised in what Churchill was saying ammunition for their campaign.
On the 9th of February, Bevan fought back. His stage was Parliament. For the first time in its history, there was to be a fourth reading of a parliamentary bill. Bevan was determined to show that parliamentary sovereignty ruled the country and not the BMA.
We ought to take pride in the fact that, despite our economic concerns, we are still able to do the most civilized thing in the world. Put the welfare of the sick in front of every other consideration. I hope the House will not hesitate to tell the British Medical Association that we look forward to this act starting on the 5th of July.
Bevan secured the support of Parliament, but the BMA's resistance intensified. Local branch votes were organised across the country to stoke up the opposition. In Newcastle, London and Liverpool, the NHS was rejected unanimously. In Brighton, 350 voted no against a single lone supporter. It took courage for any medic to speak out in favour of the health service. But a minority did brave the opposition. Among them a young nurse, Avis Hutt, and her surgeon husband, Roscoe.
There was not much point in anyone arguing with me about not wanting the health service because I was a public rebel agitator, poster carrier, tub thumper, soapbox orator. So I would argue in favour. My husband was committed to the notion of a unified health service, free at the time of use. There was a big meeting of the BMA in Birmingham, which was Chamberlain country, and my husband attempted to defend the act. He came back absolutely shattered, pale and shaking. They had howled him down.
Many supporters of the NHS were young students who had joined a radical group called the Socialist Medical Association. In the hostile climate of 1948, they were branded as traitors.
My impression was that we were a persecuted minority and we were quite marginalised. There was a very vocal opposition who were very aggressive, and they would single out students who they knew supported the NHS, and we were pilloried. I was. You'd have 50 or 60 other students ranged behind you in a lecture theatre, and the professor pointing his finger at me and saying, "I remember your parents, they were Reds," and so on. We felt quite singled out.
As a medical student at St Mary's, I was called a commie by everybody. I wasn't one, but they called me one. "What the hell do you think you're trying to impose on us?" they would say. You'll have us marching up and down the street as if we were in the army, signing things which we're told to sign. You'll be militarising medicine. That's all you want to do.